Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we are interviewing Ryan Roghaar, who's the founder of R2 Media Group. Ryan, welcome to the program.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate your time, man.
You are welcome. And so I want to talk all about what you focus on, which is building relationships and what's the importance and why bother. And in this society that we live in now, which is digital and give it to me now, and let me just text this and instant chat and bot, where does relationships fit into that? Is it a thing of the past, or is it literally now something that is a new frontier re-emerging because nobody's doing it?
Well, I honestly think it's kind of both, right? Maybe it helps to give a little bit of background here. So a few years ago, well, basically my entire 20s, I worked for myself in an office with no, or very little outside human contact. We worked largely for customers over the internet, most of whom I've still never met in person. And I had the opportunity, through a long convoluted story, to start doing work in Spain. And after my first trip to Spain, I had, really observed the way that they treat one another over there and the importance of human relationships to that culture. Not to say that doesn't exist here in the States, but it was really impactful for me, especially as somebody who'd basically been working for myself nose down for 10 years at that point. So this moment, or this aha moment for me in Spain, was that, the power of personal relations. This is really where it's at, is building great relationships. And it's also, the funnest, most meaningful part of our existence, the thing that we take and, can actually hang our hat on versus all the good work we might do in any given day. So after having this realization, which has now been about 6 years ago now, we changed the focus of our agency. We have our agency, R2, that's basically a digital marketing firm / creative shop. And we transitioned into more of what we call a relationship development shop. So we spend a lot of time working on these personal relationships with our clients and those who we do business with, and just those who we interact with day to day. In all our research and all this time together, one of the things that we sort of had discovered is that as a society, we're reaching this level of technological saturation, and we're sort of naturally pushing back against all this tech, and we're starting to look for tangible things, tangible items, experiences. It's things like the foodie movements and craft beers and, beard oil and all this kind of stuff. These are all us looking for and trying to grasp onto real life tangible things, outside of this digital universe. Mm-hmm. The promise of Twitter and things like this, social media networks, all that stuff was greater human connection. And sure, you're talking to more humans from all over the planet, but nothing replaces eye contact. And so I think as a result of this technological saturation, we are now sort of just naturally taking more stock of the relationships we've got with people and with things. And we're looking for, to fill some sort of void that's been opened up in us by, maybe much focus on technology or too much time spent trying to reach each other through digital means. And I think as a result, back to your question, I think that, yes, it was an old way of doing business prior to the internet, but I think that we're getting to a point where it's going to become the new old way of doing business. Like, it never really went away, but we tried to do with all this technology and all these other things. But at least in my experience as an agency owner and as an entrepreneur, the relationships that I grow in person sure move a lot quicker than the ones I've ever fostered over email or elsewhere.
And when you say in person, could that also mean video, Zoom video, or even phone, as opposed to just an email, just a text, just a Facebook message? Meaning, what if someone is 3 states away? It's going to be hard to develop that in-person relationship.
Sure, and I think there's obviously levels to this, right? I mean, one version of it might be a quick tweet text, maybe that's the lowest level. Somewhere in the middle might be a phone call or a video chat, something like that. And obviously the third or most ideal level might be this, hand-to-hand, face-to-face, over lunch kind of connection. But you're right. I mean, it's a matter of practicality. Not everybody can do that. And it's not easy to just zip 3 states over or whatever.
Yeah.
I would say though, if you ever do, and I've actually done stuff like that on more than one occasion, if I thought a relationship was worthy enough of developing, hop a cheap flight, hop a Southwest flight to the next state over and go over there. I will tell you that is wildly impactful to the person on the other end. And if you are looking to do business, I mean, what better way to show them than that you really value them or you really care about that work. And you know what? I uprooted from Utah today, and now I'm in Arizona with you for lunch.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, there's an aspect of it that, some might look at and say is wasteful or whatever. But I think sometimes going over the top and actually really going feet first into a relationship like that and facilitating that in-person relationship, even if it's difficult, can say an awful lot about your character and then just sort of, kick that relationship off on a good foot.
And just like many things in business development, you're not going to do that to 400 cold contacts, of course. You're going to level it up, and you're going to pick like the ABCs of your database, and that technique is going to be for the A+++. And you're going to reserve that to the ones where you just really develop great rapport. Maybe it did start off with a LinkedIn connection, and then you started emailing. Then you jumped on a phone and got to know each other. Maybe you turned the video on, and maybe you exchanged some referrals or growth ideas together, and then it's like, you know what, we could do something together. Why don't we? And so I think that those levels of ascension are really important in building that relationship. What have you found that way?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a great point. And I mean, I think it makes sense to be a little bit selective, right? I mean, you can't just fly out and meet every prospect, and not every prospect is going to end up returning that favor or whatever. And so it makes sense to not do that. I think this idea of ascension is right. And so, I mean, to give you examples of how I've done that in sort of our practice, we've not only done that just for personal things, but we've also leveraged our podcast. You as a podcaster can probably understand that. But we, to give you an idea of one relationship, there was a fellow agency owner, another ad agency owner who I really admired and wanted to spend some time getting to know. So one of the things that I did was, start reaching out to him through social media. And, I'm an unknown. He's an unknown to me. So we started developing a little bit of a relationship, or at least got on radar that way. Second step was, reaching out, making some DMs, doing a few things with him that were, maybe a step above just your average tweet or whatever, responding to things, trying to add value where I can. Third step was we actually invited this guy on our podcast. And so, but rather than just calling him in, as so many do, and as we do with the lion's share of our guests, he was in Santa Monica, California. It's about a 10-hour drive from here in Salt Lake. And so we packed up a part of our studio and actually drove it down to Santa Monica to interview him. Of course, we, took advantage of the opportunity that we were down there. And so we set up other interviews and things like that and did a little show on the road thing. But this gave us an opportunity to meet with him. And so what was really interesting is we had set up our call with him initially for about a 30-minute call. And then after having the opportunity to go down and meet him, our podcast, the actual final episode, ended up going on almost 2 hours. So this guy who has a tremendous amount of sway, a lot of demands on his schedule, things like that, was willing to put off everything because we made this trip, right? He felt sort of an obligation to do this work with us. As a result, I've since been down to his office a number of times. Now I would consider us sort of friends. But the, other opportunities I've had to run into him, and this might be how some people could leverage these relationships and find ways to meet people where it's not maybe just a one Southwest flight for lunch, but it's something bigger, is by use of conferences and things like that. So I went out to a design conference out in Atlanta where this guy was speaking, and, we already had a little bit of groundwork laid. He already knew who I was. He got out to Atlanta and didn't know anybody, but we knew each other. So we got to really know each other over this week in Atlanta. And so, I went out to this conference, so it wasn't just like this one-on-one lunch. So I was able to sort of, I guess, rationalize the business decision or the expense of going out there a little more, because not only was I able to attend this event, but I could add value by meeting him. And so, and now, we've got this great relationship going on, and I think there's a lot of, upside in our future. So it's, it has been totally worth that effort.
Let me unpack that just a little bit and preface it with this question. When you saw these three scenarios that you were thinking of, and you would like to reach out to this person, and you kind of had this mental idea of, okay, first I could do this, and then ultimately I could do this. What was the outcome. If you think about the Stephen Covey begin with the end in mind, if all things fell into place for, let's say the guy that you drove down and did the podcast with, if everything was green light after that, what were you hoping could potentially happen with deepening that relationship?
Well, I think part of it, and I think this is true in any relationship you're developing, is intention. You've got to have, set your intention, not unlike Stephen Covey's quote. So you do have to have some idea. However, I will also say having too much of an intention set or having too big a goal makes it difficult for people to live up to it.
Yeah.
And so in the case of this guy, it was largely networking. I was looking to position myself as a thought leader in a couple different categories and start doing some public speaking. This guy is doing all those things. It was a connection for me to meet him, get to know him. He was also a few years ahead of me in terms of agency development and growth and build a company, things like that. And so there were some nice features that he brought to the table that I was hoping I could maybe rub up against him and pick up on. But it wasn't so in stone that I was like, okay, well, I must broker a business deal with him, or I must sell X, Y, and Z to him. Or,
but you were thinking that he might be a foot in the door leverage. Like if you guys started high-fiving over the phone kind of a relationship, it wasn't like, give me your credit card, I want to sell you something, but it would have led to, you were hoping it would lead to, hey, if you ever hear of a speaking engagement where I could, or, hey, let me pick your brain on something. Our agency is looking to develop relationships with people such as, do you know anyone that, in other words, it wasn't just, let's have this person on my podcast and hope for the best. You had kind of that intention of hopefully that would lead to something.
Well, and I would say that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the bit of service that I had in my heart. So in my mind, it was, what can I do for him as well? How can I add value and actually earn that position? So many people say, you're the sum of the 5 people in your circle or whatever. A lot of times I try and flip that on the head and go, well, what I do that would make me worthy of being in their top 5. And so like doing that
question, you almost want to say verbally, hey, listen, I want to ask you a question in a few weeks. And in order for me to feel worthy and feel like I'm able to ask you this question like a small favor, I want to do something for you. I want to include this and I want to provide that so that I can do it's almost like you want to verbally do it. But the point is you want to do it ahead of time so that when you ask that question, hey, can I ask you a quick favor? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. What do you need? Right. And because they're saying that because they feel like, man, he did this and was that, and he's not been pushy. So I think you're exactly right. Like Bob Berg says in The Go-Giver, be that give of value before you even hint at asking for something back in return.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make when you're asking about, setting an intention or starting with an end in mind. I think it's okay to have some, prospect. And I guess if you're doing a sales call or if your objective is you have to hit a quarterly number or something, maybe there's a reason that you need to focus more in on that. This relationship example that I'm talking about wasn't so hard and fast. It wasn't really developed around a specific item. So, but another example I can give from sort of early in my career was that, so I grew up in a sort of mid-sized, 75,000 people sized town called Pocatello, Idaho. And in Pocatello, not a lot of ad agencies. I think there's one, if they're even still around. And there's, not a lot of stuff going on in sort of the type of work I was doing. And so that, as a result, most of my clients came via the internet. During that time, though, I was a young guy, and so I didn't know what to call myself. So I was just calling myself, a creative agency. And I was calling myself, just using the vernacular of the industry, right? Trying to fit in with these guys who were legitimate agencies, from other cities. However, I'd actually never set foot in one. So one of the things I started to do is, again, and not unlike this relationship I've been talking about, is I started reaching out to all the local agencies from Pocatello. The most local are about 2 to 3 hours away in Salt Lake City or in Boise, Idaho. And in those 2 cities, I started reaching out to agencies, and I was basically just offering up a month of my time in exchange for the opportunity to kind of be a fly on the wall, learn a little bit about how the agency works, and so I reached out to, maybe 2-3 dozen of these places, different agencies of all different sizes, and only one bit down here in Salt Lake City. And ultimately, I worked for them for a month, developed such a great relationship in that month that they kept using me as a freelancer for 2 more years, and then ultimately hired me on as an art director. Then, as is normal in the agency business, there are ebbs and flows, and eventually I was laid off and went back to work for myself. But the moral of the story was that I started that engagement, or I started that relationship by offering something of myself where I would dare ask something of them. And I think that's, a real key characteristic. It's one of these things, and I think it's kind of a negative byproduct of this internet era, or sort of this, the get rich quick, or the stuff we see where on Instagram, where everybody wants this instant gratification. I think we often lose sight of this, the building of a relationship part. And because people are so accessible, it's not out of the norm to receive a text of somebody asking a pretty presumptuous question or really demanding something of your time. And it's just like no sweat off their nose, to ask you this, so they're sending you a text saying, oh, hey, well, how did you do this? Or, hey, how do you get, develop a new client? Or how do you do X, Y, Z? And, in real life, they would never ask that question if you were their friend. But because of the accessibility that comes with the internet and Twitter, things like that, they're sort of circumventing the importance of developing that relationship from the jump. And I think, ultimately it's led to this situation where we've got a lot of people who are, just kind of not intelligent or not good about developing relationships of good quality. Instead, they look for these, what can you do for me kind of relationships. And ultimately, the people who are successful anyway don't operate that way.
Have you ever heard that old speaker saying? I learned it from Brian Tracy at a seminar years and years ago. But everyone's favorite radio station is what? WIIFM. What's in it for me? And if we can broadcast, quote unquote, or advertise on WIIFM, we need to flip that around. And a lot of people teach this in their trainings. They call it different things, but in reality, what's in it for that person I'm trying to develop a relationship with? What's in it for them? Well, if I can provide this, and this, but if I can, how many times have we accepted a LinkedIn request from someone and then seconds later it's like, buy my stuff? And it's like, that's not the intent of accepting the relationship. It's maybe getting to know you. It's maybe moving it to a quick phone call. But we should, and it's hard because ultimately we do want to maybe ask for help, assistance, networking, strategic alliance, business from someone, and you could just see that but you've got to pace yourself and keep it from feeling so in your face. You've got to have that sequence. So I think that's a really big point that you're bringing up, is having that intention, but kind of, staggering it, putting out in stages, but thinking, what should this person need? What am I observing? Maybe you even see on their social media, LinkedIn or something, some thing they posted, and you're like, ooh, they need this thing. I bet I can find that, or give some resources that way.
Well, what it is, I think, is just sort of this mentality of service, this willingness to give of yourself, and then, the chips will fall as they may. And most of the time, if you give of yourself, they will end up falling positively. Now, it's not a quick way to gain new business. It's not if you're in an emergency situation and you've got to hurry up and win some new business, this might not be the tactic you choose. But long term, it'll be the thing that supports you into a long and fruitful career, and also be the thing that sort of helps you, get the most out of the life you're living. And it's interesting because there's sort of these two competing ideas, right? I mean, in marketing and advertising, we're sort of taught that the whole idea is what can you do for them, right? I mean, the marketing messages that resonate most are the ones that are appealing to somebody's sense, the way they see themselves, or the thing they think they need, or whatever it is. You're not going to convince them to buy your Audi if they're really in the market for a BMW. I mean, if they're a BMW driver, they don't care about your Audi, no matter how nice it is, no matter how cool your headlights are, or whatever. And so, I mean, you do have to appeal to that bit of, I guess, sort of narcissism that exists within your consumer. So from a marketing or an advertising perspective, that might be the angle you're trying to go with. However, that's sort of contrary to the idea of developing strong relationships and trying to, really have an authentic relationship with somebody versus, this, transactional kind of view. And so it is interesting, you brought up LinkedIn, and, I too get a lot of those requests where, you accept the invite, and then, 2 minutes later, somebody's trying to pitch you on something. And I can't imagine that works very well. So I don't know why it seems to stick, like why people are doing it. I mean, there must be enough people biting to make it happen.
It's like the Nigerian prince email. Right. there's enough people that did bite on it. They just keep on doing it and go for the statistics.
Yeah.
So, hey, well, what is it that your firm specifically does? What kind of clients do you work with, and what kind of programs do you help them execute?
Yeah, so we're a little bit all over the place in terms of industry. We do a lot of work in automotive, tourism, healthcare, health insurance, some like retail. And so we're a little bit scattered in that stuff. But one of the things that we do that I think is unique with us versus other creative agencies is, again, this idea of, developing this relationship. So we try and analyze sort of the relationships from sort of the way we frame it as sort of as top management to top consumer. And so we think about sort of each aspect of the business from step one, or the top leadership, all the way down to the person who's buying the product. And then we try and identify, spots that we can leverage or damage we can fix, things like that, before we actually get into delivering any, tactical stuff, So, I mean, we do all the traditional stuff. We build websites, we do graphic design, we create marketing and advertising pieces, we do digital marketing, all that kind of stuff. But the difference is that we try and do it through this lens of relationship development. So the types of messaging we use, the types of clients we choose, these things all relate back to this idea of how can we create a real life, authentic relationship where we're providing service to our consumer or to the person who's buying from us. And so, a lot of times we'll find that the problems don't even, it's not necessarily a problem with the product, but maybe there's an internal management problem, or somebody in-house is, isn't buying the corporate vision or isn't into the culture of the company or something. And, maybe the problem isn't even external. Maybe it's not even a problem that has to do with the marketing or the advertising you've been doing. Maybe it can be solved, by repairing some relationship along the way, or, by doing some techniques in social listening and things like that, and having the understanding of what your customers think of you. Maybe we can better understand how to react or how to respond to those guys in a real, live, and authentic way versus, just pushing ads at them, or, hey, it's the holidays, so buy just cause, that kind of thing. And so I think that's kind of our key differentiator anyway, is just that we sort of try and do everything through this lens of a relationship. And there's, a lot of range in the engagements, from more consultative engagements where we sit down, staff members and things like that, and try and identify these problems. And it's much more consultative. And then there's versions of this where it's just, hey man, we need a new website. So we do the new website version also, but again, we try and apply this extra layer of, how is our website communicating, through our UI, UX development and all these other things. We try to explore how we can make a relationship a little bit better.
Excellent.
And so I think that's a nice little thing.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's amazing. And so how can people reach out, connect with your agency, listen to your podcast, pick up a copy of some of your teachings? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, so we've got a couple different things. The ad agency is Who Media Group. The website is just r2mg.com, so r2mg.com for the ad agency. You can find me and more about me just at ryanroghaar.com. That's Ryan, ROGHAAR.com. And you can also find some of the work we've been doing. We've sort of dovetailed into this nice niche as remote workers ourselves, and as longtime freelancers and people who've worked from all over the globe. We found this nice little niche where relationships have come together with sort of remote working, and we've started creating content around the idea of teaching those who work remotely and those who hire them how to better work together. I feel strongly that this may be sort of, at least a major aspect of work in the future. And so we started creating materials around that. And you can find that stuff at teammateapart.com.
Excellent. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great getting to know you and learning about your approach to business.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate your time.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.